It's 5:30, and I welcome everybody to the Saugeen Shores Committee of Adjustment for September the 17th, 2018, and I now call this meeting to order. At this time, I remind members their acknowledgement of any pecuniary interest, if so, now or at the time it arises on the agenda. Item number 3 is the adoption of minutes. I have a motion moved by Councillor Myatt, seconded by Mr. Legault, dated today, September the 17th, 2018, that we do adopt the minutes of the August 20th, 2018 meeting as circulated. Discussion. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Just a comment about the minutes. There's usually a good indication of what questions were asked, and there's not always an indication of the answer to the question. And I know sometimes there isn't an answer, but often there's a comment made about how the answer can be provided or can be available. I think the minutes should reflect the response to the questions as well as the questions, just as an observation. Also, the minutes have been abbreviated over the last little while, and I think it would be helpful to the long-term sort of record of activity to have the list of conditions with motions included in with the decision, so that it, instead of having to then go to another document to find out exactly what happened, because often they're pretty short and 2 or 3 sentences. I think they could easily become part of the minutes if that's possible. And I'll just, through you, pose that question to our development officer.
All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I don't believe there's any additional business. I move on to our public hearings. This is item 5.1, minor variance application A-47-18.44. This is an application from 1615381 Ontario Incorporated with a municipal address on Godbert Street in Port Elgin. Ms. Fortier.
Great, thank you. Just before I get going, I'd just like to note that for both applications tonight, they are quite large sites, and it can be difficult to see all the details in the documents provided. So I do have large-scale drawings of the site plans. So if anybody would like to see those, just let me know, and I can pass those around. So this is an application, as mentioned, for a property along Godrich Street at the intersection of Godrich and Lake Ridge Drive. So it's part of a larger draft plan, but we're just talking about this kind of selected piece here. So in terms of context, this is the Canadian Tire right here in the Super 8 Motel, just to kind of situate everybody. The property in question is zoned highway commercial, so with some HC6, I believe, with some special provisions. It's currently vacant. The surrounding land uses are generally commercial. There's a park across the street and residential at the back, but most of this residential hasn't been developed yet. In terms of access, the property has access off of 21 and Lake Ridge Drive. So the purpose of the application is to facilitate the construction of a new hotel with 68 rooms on the subject lands. So to do this, the application is seeking relief from a number of provisions from the zoning bylaw. These include the front yard setback, the building height, landscape provisions of the highway commercial zone, as well as relief from the number of loading spaces required in the general provisions of the bylaw. So this is the site plan here. So it's not the entirety of the site that's selected, only a portion of the property is proposed to be developed, and then the balance of the lands to the west will remain vacant and will be developed in the future. So this is the hotel here, facing onto Godrich, with one entrance off of Godrich Street and another entrance off of Lake Ridge Drive. So just briefly, the land use, in terms of the land use policies, the proposal does comply with the PPS. In terms of the Bruce County official plan, it is within the primary urban community. So for these issues, we will then look to the Saugeen Shores official plan. Again, it's highway commercial, and a hotel is a permitted use in the highway commercial zone. or designation, sorry. And then in terms of the zoning, highway commercial special, the special provisions for the highway commercial in this case have to do with buffering and landscaping when adjacent to a residential property. So it's not really an issue for this application because this isn't proposed to be built adjacent to any residential lots. But when the balance of the land is developed in the future, then this provision will apply. And just to briefly go over what a couple more details of what's being sought in terms of relief for the zoning. The minimum front yard setback is proposed to be set further back than per the bylaw. The bylaw requires a minimum setback of 10 to 20 meters, and the proposed is 37.16 meters from Godrich Street. And I've added more details in the report in terms of kind of why that's being requested that I can go into if the committee would like, but I've been told to kind of keep the presentation brief to give chance for discussion. In terms of the landscaping, the highway commercial zone requires 30% of the property to be landscaped. The proposed development includes 18.5% landscaped open space. It should be noted that the applicant excluded the balance of the lands slated for future development from this calculation, so it's really only being calculated off of this site plan provided. So the rest of the lands kind of down here isn't included in that 18%. And in terms of these two variances, for the most part, the issues that are raised through the request for these variances continue to be addressed through site plan control, which is where the details of the landscaping are looked at. So it should address, the site plan control should be able to address the issues raised here. For the final two, in terms of the height provision, there's just a minor request for additional height from 10 meters to 10.4 meters, so representing a very minor increase that wouldn't be noticeable on the property. And then finally, section 3.17 of the zoning bylaw regulates loading spaces in commercial buildings, and for a building of this footprint, it states that it should include 3 loading spaces. They are proposing 1 loading space. Now we recognize that business owners are best positioned to know the operational requirements of their businesses, so we feel if they said they don't need any loading spaces but are willing to provide 1, and if they feel that meets their operational requirements, we don't see any reason that would be an issue. So just in terms of consultation, in terms of Town of Saugeen Shores staff, they expect that town issues regarding landscaping can be addressed through site plan processes, and if there are no other issues raised by any of the other commenting agencies. We didn't receive any public comments in regards to this application. So in terms of the 4 tests, I do think it meets the intent and purpose of the official plan and the zoning bylaw, represents an appropriate and orderly development for the use of the lands, and is minor in nature. So just to recap, it is for the construction of a hotel, and I do recommend approval, subject to any comments received by any members of the public or the committee.
Davis, fortunately, does the applicant wish to address the committee? Would you turn the microphone on, please? Thank you.
I don't have a very good batting average here, do I? Tom and Jennifer Evans are here tonight to answer any questions you may have. The only thing I'll say before I sit down is we have filed the site plan application. We've been working with your town staff back and forth, and we're hoping to have the agreement before council sometime in October so that construction on the hotel can begin in about a month's time. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Is any member of the public that wishes to address? If not, committee? Councillor Minaj.
Mine is minor in matter as well, and I would ask that Jay take a note maybe in the future of 30%. Sorry, let's get that right. The minimum 10 to 20 meter setback and this is asking for 37.16 meters. I would imagine that's got a lot to do with the nature of the business, and that is people like to sleep in a hotel, and they want to be away from the road noise as much as possible. So I think that there may be a future for an exception clause, Jay, that says that in our community, if lo and behold, if we end up with another half a dozen more hotels, that we wouldn't need to go through this again if we address the fact that we acknowledge that motels, hotels could use a further increased setback to further their business properly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One would go through you to our Director of Infrastructure and Engineering. Hope I got that right. There's a provision in the site plan design for the in and out, right in, right out kind of situation at the access point off the highway. We didn't have much success with that at the Circle K. So I'm just curious, how could this be designed, or what is the standard for this that would at least give it a chance to work the way it's supposed to? Because we haven't had very much success with the one that's just down the road from it. And then I have a couple of other questions.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if you think about the two that are at the Independent, that would be more of what we would look for in engineering design here. So the one at the mobile gas station has barrier curb around it, and then the one at the truck entrance has a do not enter sign and thicker rumble strips. So both of those are a better situation than what's at the Circle K. My understanding with the Circle K is we still needed to be a bit flexible for large trucks turning in for how they fill with the gas tanks. This will be a bit different.
Thank you. I did want to question how the town follows up after the fact. I was disappointed to read the comment that said that the landscaping, the plantings and screenings on the western end of the particular lot and the southwestern sort of half of that side, that they're not important right now because nothing's happening back there. I'm just curious to know, how do we then make sure that when something else happens, that it's been flagged, that because technically we should be looking at an entire lot parcel unless there's a severance. So I'm curious to know how we do that. And the second part of that is in allowing or enabling a reduced landscaping coverage. The comment was made that this isn't taking into account the whole lot. So how then is the assumption that we'll pick up some extra space in the back part when it gets developed, or, is the assumption that, it's now just gone from the mix. So I'd just be curious to know how those things sort of play into the future development of the lot. And I don't know, is that a Bruce County planning question, or is it a you question, Jay?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit more detail. The balance of the land is proposed to be severed at a future time, so the application did indicate that they are planning on severing kind of where that access road off of Lake Ridge Drive would come in, which is why they only included those lands in the landscaping provisions, just because that in the future, the long-term plan is for that to become its own lot with just the hotel on it. And then when they figured out what they're going to do with that other piece, then they'll bring forward any applications they need, including a severance.
Well, if that's the case, then why are we not attempting to get some landscaping across the western boundary of this hotel lot? If the idea is that there's going to be a severance and there'll be something separate behind it, whether that's commercial, it's a budding residential. So, at the moment, who knows what that severed lot will become. But, why are we not attempting to have some landscaping take place there, has the buffer or the bit of a division between potentially two different uses? Because the time to do it is when the construction is going on. So, I'm now more curious about that. I did want to ask also, too, for a comment about, we often see references in the planning reports that say that there are concerns about endangered or species or species at risk. And there's always this reference to, you got to go to the MNRF and, follow through with them. How do we make sure that actually happens? I'm pretty confident that there's not any major issues there, but does the town actually follow up with that, or do we just kind of leave that dangling? Because someday, and I don't believe it's necessarily true with this application, but someday there really might be a situation where we should be very concerned about a species at risk or an endangered species. So this is another application where I read that. I'd just like to know, how do we follow up on that? Do you do it with Bruce County Planning? Is that still part of an application process?
No, it isn't, and we don't follow up on that. And I believe the policy kind of refers to anybody who finds any endangered species on their property, right? Whether you're developing or not, right? If you have an endangered bird that nests on your property, then whether or not you're developing, there's policies that apply. So we don't generally follow up, and as long as the Conservation Authority has given us kind of indication that they don't think there's a strong enough reason to do an EIS, then we kind of leave it at that, and no, we don't follow up. But it's the responsibility of anyone who finds anything on their property to follow up with the MNR in terms of endangered species at risk.
So we put we put comments in the reports that really don't mean anything.
Those are directly from the SPCA comments. Those aren't my comments. Those are the SPCA's comments.
Okay. I know that a contribution in lieu of parkland has already been made on this lot, and so that went into some things at the park, and that's good. I also think we are seeing a drawing in front of us tonight that shows some additional landscaping across the corner on the Super 8 property. That's all good on that corner. I'm curious, through you, Mr. Chair, to a member of the town staff, how do we get the sidewalk connectors going beyond this property? Because it's showing a sidewalk across the front along the highway and down Lake Ridge. But, how do we get the sidewalk to continue along the highway down across the Super 8, Boston Pizza, and all the way over to the Circle K? How does that, is that just something that over time the town will get around to it?
Yes, similar to how the sidewalk was installed at the north end of Port Elgin between Devonshire and Independent, is they were identified as growth-related projects, and the sidewalk would be budgeted for a future date, that installation. I'm not sure, Amanda, if you're planning on any time soon. It's certainly generally stated in our development charges background study that the highway is to have sidewalks on both sides, and so certainly we are eligible to consider it and would identify it as a future capital project when appropriate. Though I would like to just go back to the comment about landscaping the rear. When we talked about it earlier, I didn't have an answer, but I've had some time to think about it, and in this particular case, there is some landscaping at the base of the hotel along the rear of the building. I didn't provide that drawing. It's a site plan detail for council. But in saying so, I also was contemplating that although there is residential development further to the west, it's a significant distance away, and I'm not sure what the landscaping would do other than it would be in the middle of potentially that part of the property when the developer is trying to construct it or they're trying to develop it. And in terms of how we evaluated it, it's that the notes may put in the file and we would make sure it's reviewed at a future date. So it appears in the parent file, so if I'm doing my job or if it's not me, the future supervisor of development services would look in the file and see that we are obligated to do what we can to manage landscaping on the remainder of the site.
Councillor Minaj.
This gets more and more interesting as we go. So I'm 100% in favor of this whole development, obviously, and I do believe the sidewalk is in place all the way, and it would be connecting now. So this is a good news story with this sidewalk as well. But the Vice Deputy Mayor's opinion on the west side landscaping, I think that I would ask staff to reconsider this. The properties, when they're severed, could end up being residential. We've seen zoning change in a matter of a blink of an eye. And for me, I will not be able to, I can tell you now, I will not be able to support this project going forward under site plan control if we don't have a complete site plan, landscaping plan for this, because of the reference to the fact that we're going to be going through a severance application. I think that we need to take it as a single entity and say we're going to make it complete now and not worry about it in the future. If I'd have thought that the owners were going to stay the owners and not sever it and not possibly change the zoning, and there was planned development for another highway commercial property, then maybe we could have waited. But I don't like the ring of it right now. So I would like to see more about the west side. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I mean, certainly the property is still subject to site plan control, whether it's severed or not, or whether it's residential or not. In so amending a bylaw, the town can choose to regulate the development by site plan control, and so can, in my mind, appropriately ensure landscaping is provided with whatever development may go on the west side, whether that's highway commercial as it's zoned now or residential. And current discussions with the landowner, with an excellent developer in the town with a long track record and an exceptional operational standard, is positive, and I think the development that's being talked about will be fit in very nicely with a hotel, if I may scoop Tom and Jennifer's future plans. So,
Mr. Gittins.
well, the short answer is no. A transportation and impact study has not been prepared for this development. In working with the developer, they only required the right in, right out, which doesn't, per industry-wide standards, doesn't require any further analysis. The types of controls that are offered by the right in, right out are adequate, at least according to the experts. And I'll defer to Amanda if I put my foot in my mouth. So. Tessa, can you put the main site plan up? At least from how I understand the hotel will operate, there is certainly a more circuitous route from Lakeridge, but most people whose first access to the hotel will be through the lobby and through the registration. They'll be searching for that, and so I think we were trying to balance form and function when we were speaking with the developer and trying to make sure that building is as far forward as it can, as our design guidelines recommend, while also making sure the function of the site as a normal hotel function could be in this location. And maybe you think it's an unreasonable trade-off, but I think it's, when we were thinking about how people use the hotel, that's going to be the main access there. 90% of the traffic is going to go to the light. They know, given the size of the building, it's a good visual marker for when they're driving, and so they'll find the access and I thought, reasonably find the parking area that's necessary rather than trying to skip traffic on the highway.
Sorry about that. The design guidelines do dictate the landscaping, the preferred landscaping along the highway commercial area. At what point is there more description as to what landscaping will be along Highway 21?
Well, the short answer is it's through site plan control, which is council's responsibility, and that's where the majority of the design is. We had in our first submission which on its first submission would have been an excellent landscape plan. It had trees, a mix of trees, shrubs, and grasses, very indicative of what our design guidelines were talking about. Branding Port Elgin has ties to the beach, ties to the downtown development community, but that we have a sanitary main that's underneath not in the road allowance, it's actually in an easement where that landscaping strip would be, and we felt it wasn't appropriate to allow trees to be located there because they would find their way into pipes and cause maintenance problems than we wanted. So we've sent the landscape plan back to the developer, and they're revising it, and I have no doubt in my mind that it'll be a high quality submission, but it'll just be shrubs and grasses along that area, more like what Ideal Supply has than what might be, say, at the Harvey site, which has more of the trees growth that we like to see.
Anyone else? Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to take a little different spin on this. A lot of the questions I had have been answered, and I just wanted to congratulate the applicant. I'll be supporting this recommendation. This is a wonderful development for the south end of Port Elgin. I like what's happening down with new buildings at the chiropractic center, and I call it the Bruce Power Plaza. The Ideal Supply landscape we're seeing, and now this landscape plan. What really intrigued me was this 60 square meters of new landscape on the Super 8 property, Mr. Chair, and I think that's probably the size of this room, maybe, or larger, but it's a good size landscape plan. I was a little concerned going from 30% down to 18.5%, but then when I learned about the landscape plan right across the road, and also learned that that's a utility corridor and they weren't able to do a lot of plantings along the boulevard, this makes perfectly good sense to me. And so again, I just wanted to congratulate the applicant and also the consultant working on this. We talk about landscape plan, and the elevations were intended to demonstrate how the town reflects the town of Saugeen Shores design guidelines. And if you look at other microtels that I've looked up, this has pretty nice architecture, and I wanted to commend you people on this good work. So this is a good news story. This is a really good news story. We should feel really, really good about this. I think the questions are good around the table, but my questions have been answered, and I'll certainly be supporting the recommendation.
Mr. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jay, if I could, just a bit of clarification on the parking. So it says there's 74 cars shown. Are those parking spaces at the back of the building intended for easy access to the rooms on the ground floor?
Well, I can't as to whether they're easy access, but those are supposed to be 9 parking spaces.
Right.
I don't know how they intend to access the building, whether they're the rooms or staff.
Okay. And the road that goes back through there, is that solely intended by the hotel, or is there any planned freeway at some point?
It's certainly not a plan to be a throughway, but it would be a shared access with the hotel and the future development to the rear.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? I have a motion moved by Councillor Myatt, seconded by Mr. Legault, dated today, September the 17th, 2018, that minor variance application A-47-18.44 be approved, subject to the conditions on the decision sheet. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Our next item is item number 5.2. This is a minor variance application A-50-18.48 Southampton Care Centre with municipal address of 140 Grey Street South in Southampton. Ms. Fortier.
Thank you. So this is a minor variance application for the proposed expansion of the Southampton Care Centre. So we've already seen some applications from them, so I think we're all familiar with the site. But just to give a little bit of a reminder, this is the existing facility here and the vacant part of the property, which is where the proposed expansion will go. And it is surrounded by residential uses as well as open space and some planned development as well. So the purpose of this application is to facilitate this expansion of the existing long-term care facility. So long-term care beds are provided by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and so the facility has applied for additional long-term care beds. The original application would have allowed for, I believe, So the initial application to the ministry would have accommodated an additional 64 long-term care beds for a total of 128. This application has not been approved to date. So the Southampton Care Centre is pursuing alternative options to increase the number of long-term care beds in the community and are submitting a further application to the ministry for a 3-story building occupying the same footprint as previously proposed. And this building would accommodate a total of 160 long-term care beds, in addition to central resident facilities and administration space. So this represents an additional 32 long-term care beds than previously proposed. So in order to facilitate this proposal, the applicants are seeking additional height for the proposed expansion in the institutional zone. The maximum height currently permitted is 10 meters, and they're requesting an additional height up to 12 meters. However, the elevations provided with the application show the height from grade to roof surface at 10.5 meters, and the height to the top of the parapet wall at 10.7 meters. So the applicant has requested that additional 2 meters just to provide for some flexibility in the final design. But the elevations, as circulated, don't go as high as that 12 meters. So yeah, these ones here, and again, I've got larger drawings if anybody would like to see those. Just briefly, in terms of the land use policies, not much has changed from the previous applications in terms of the county official plan and the Saugeen Shores official plan. Just briefly, in terms of the zoning, I'd just like to note that, as said, they've requested a maximum height of 12 meters. Now, in both the R3 zone, which permits apartment dwellings, and the R4 zone, which permit apartment dwellings, nursing homes, and homes for the aged, and retirement homes, both those zones allow for a maximum height of 12 meters. So this proposed height is in keeping with similar uses across the municipality and other zones. So in an R4 zone, this facility could be, or even an R3 zone, this facility could be 12 meters. And as mentioned, this property is zoned institutional, not residential. So in terms of agency circulation, Saugeen Shores town staff have again mentioned that any of their issues can be resolved through site plan control, as this application will be subject to it. And the SVCA didn't recommend the preparation of an EIS, recognized that they still need to go through their permitting process for the expansion, and so they'll need to update that. But in general, it's acceptable and no issues raised by other agencies. In terms of public comments, we did receive a letter from some neighboring landowners with some concerns with the increased height. So I think that was attached as an appendix to your report, so you should have those with you. And I believe that the applicant's planner is also here and can address some of those concerns that were raised from neighboring landowners that had to do with landscaping and kind of the how it would be viewed from adjacent properties and the impacts of that additional height. And so in terms of the 4 tests, I do feel that it meets the 4 tests in terms of the intent and purpose of the official plan. It's institutional, long-term care homes are permitted. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the variance is in line with similar uses across the municipality, so I do believe it meets the intent and purpose in that front. In terms of is it desirable for the appropriate and orderly development and use of the land, I believe so. In the institutional zone, this makes sense, and it will allow for additional long-term care beds and fulfilling a need that it has been identified in our community for additional long-term care beds. And is it minor in nature? I believe that it is. It's a minor increase in height from what's permitted, and it will just provide that flexibility in design moving forward with the application. So, just got the summary up there. I do recommend approval based on subject to any comments that are heard today at this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fortier. Does the applicant wish to address the committee?
It's the red. I had a green light. I always thought that meant go, but thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Al McNair. I'm the planning consultant for the Southampton Care Centre project, and as well today with me are Brenda Ohm, who is the administrator of the Southampton Care Centre, and Steve Argue, who's in charge of all the buildings and facilities operations at Southampton Care Centre. This is actually the third time that this has been before the Committee of Adjustment, which is a little unusual, but the present application, which the last time we were at the committee was approved, and we've been waiting since June or July before the provincial election for a response since then for a decision on that 128-bed proposal, which was a combination of an expansion and renovation of the existing facility. But we've received no decision. We haven't been turned down by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. We don't have any decision from them. And our client really is eager to move this process forward. And they thought, perhaps we could entice the ministry to look more favorably on Southampton if we gave them a second proposal as an option and said, listen, we believe the need is there in the community, and here's a way that we could, on essentially the same new building footprint, provide, and that's important in terms of the stormwater management aspects of the thing, and the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority are satisfied that this would work as the previous one would. But we could essentially create 160 beds by building up, going to 3 stories. So there would be, your sort of administration and central facilities on the ground floor, along with what we refer to as home units. The ministry's sort of design thinking is that they like this number of 32 beds in a home unit. It has its each home unit has its own nursing station. It has its own a whole variety of facilities, and then you just kind of expand in these modules. So there would be one home unit on the ground floor along with the administration and common facilities, and then 2 home units on the second and on the third floor. So you'd have a total that would give you an opportunity to essentially construct a 160 bed long-term care facility. But we're dependent entirely on the ministry as to whether it goes as 128 or 160, or indeed if it goes at all, because that's just how the system works. So, because our client's goal is to try and bring new long-term care beds to Saugeen Shores and the surrounding communities as soon as possible, that's why we're offering the ministry this other option. Maybe this will at least inspire a decision on their part on one or the other of them. I do agree with the comments that the Bruce County Planning Report was outlined by Tessa Fortier, that the minor variance does meet the 4 tests, and I explained that, outlined my opinion on that in my application letter. And I would also note there was a concern expressed in the letter that was sent in, signed by three neighbors of the property, about the setback along. Why is the setback smaller on Grenville Street than it is on Spence Street? The bylaw requires a 7.5 meter building setback. That is what's provided on the Grenville Street side. It's actually a greater setback on the Spence Street side, and a lot of this has to do with when you're trying to meet all the and there's tons of regulations. I couldn't even begin to explain them. I leave that to the architects to wrestle with. But in terms of configuring these home units and hence the building to meet all the internal and functional requirements that the ministry requires for a long-term care facility, this configuration that we'd worked out for that one-story unit is one that can effectively be, you can duplicate it on a second floor or on a third floor because it has all the functional, it meets all the functional aspects that the ministry requires. So if you try to pull a building further back from Grenville Street or push it towards Spence Street, it changes the internal functioning and messes up the room sizes and a whole bunch of other things that the architects have tried to work out on this stuff. I don't envy their task a lot of the time. So as so we're essentially working here with the same building footprint as the original application in terms of the new build, and therefore we don't have any additional impact on stormwater management around the thing. So the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority is quite comfortable with that aspect of it. Before the meeting, I had the opportunity to speak briefly with Mr. and Mrs. Mazmanian, and I apologize to them because we've shown with our application, the county asked us if we could provide a building elevation. Our architects put one, were able to put one together for us, but it did not show any landscaping along the side of the building. And so there was a comment in the objection letter about, well, it's kind of a brick wall with windows. And yes, but we also knew that we have to go through the site plan approval process with the town, and that the town has to approve our site plan, our landscaping plans, and our building elevations as part of that process. It's a completely separate thing from the minor variance or zoning process, which deals strictly with, what's the appropriate height of the building. So if the town isn't satisfied with what we propose on that score, you folks won't give us the approval, and so therefore nothing gets built. It's kind of like dealing with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. They don't like our project, they don't approve it, and nothing gets built. But I do apologize that those elevations didn't show that, and obviously we would have to upgrade the landscaping plan, which is part of the site plan application, to show additional landscaping. Could also look at things like what's the sort of the treatment of the roof line and things like that, and we're quite willing to hear comments from the neighbors if they have other suggestions to offer on that score. But ultimately we have to satisfy the staff and council of Saugeen Shores that with us to get our site plan approval. Otherwise nothing happens. So I think that kind of sums up my comments on the thing, sir, and members of the committee, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. McNair. Anybody from the public that wishes to address the committee?
I'm Harry Mazmanian. I live at 142 Grenville Street. I'm the instigator of this letter. I sent it to us. In principle, I don't object to the expansion of the nursing home. We moved here in 2012, built a home, thought we were going to live in a residential neighborhood. And the existing nursing home being one level fits right in there. And having a 3-story building directly across the road from us at whatever height of 10.7 meters, or if even it becomes 12 meters, it's going to be a daunting building sitting right in front of us. So when I come to sell my home in the future, one day, somebody's going to come driving down Grenville Street, and they're not going to look at my house. They're going to look at this monstrosity across the street from me, and they're going to drive right by. That's my concern. So that's why I'm asking the Variance Committee to deny this request for this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. No one else wishes to speak? Committee. Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is still a good news story, and I don't, government should get behind it and support it, and we should get in the ground real fast. I do support the concept that landscaping has a purpose, and it's not just that the landscaping looks good, that it could actually mask something that's not as attractive. Sometimes we put landscaping in for good reasons, to beautify things. So, to my way of thinking, the plan shows plenty of landscaping already, and it's probably it's a small error that we haven't addressed, the continuation of the landscaping fronting Grenville Street. My suggestion would be that as this comes back for site plan control, I guess I'm on a landscaping theme tonight, that sufficiently designed trees, hedgerows, whatever, we've seen So Green provide 12 to 15 foot high trees or greater. I'm not talking about putting some sticks in the ground that are going to take 30 years to get to 20 and 30 foot fruition. I'm talking about putting some substantial trees in there now that would give that canopy growth, that it would provide shade at certain times to certain elements, even though it's on the north side. I think this is the north side of the building, is it not? It's east side. So the sun comes up in the east. So there might be some shade benefits, but there certainly would be some benefits from hiding what might otherwise be viewed as a whole bunch of bricks and windows. So I would like to see some consideration. I know it's detail. I know I'm asking for detail, but I think that it merits it, and I think that it would help the project.
Thank you. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Just for clarification, the planning consultant represented that there was a 7.5 meter setback. In addition to that, Jay, is there, there's a road allowance there too, right? So it's pushing it even further back. So there's plenty of room there. The site plan is not yet showing a sidewalk in there either, but there is a road allowance on top of that 7.5 meters, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you. As a follow-up to the Vice Deputy Mayor, I would like to add, Jay, that this person with a vote is willing to forego a sidewalk in that location, on that side of the street, if one was deemed necessary, in order to provide good growth opportunity for the landscape barrier that I suggested. So if you could put that all into consideration, I'm not saying that I get what I asked for, but I certainly would like you to consider it. Thank you.
Mr. Legault.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Jay, is there a percentage of lot that for landscaping, much like the commercial zone? Does it apply to this? Is it 30%?
The landscaping in the zone is 30% requirement, and I believe, at least in the initial site plan review, they were compliant. So it was a matter of, what style, maturity, species mix, and that was certainly followed up on when they submitted the revised site plan.
For you, Mr. Chair, to the planner, the elevations that you showed are about 10.5 meters. Is that correct?
Yeah, to the top of the roof.
Why the difference again?
Just to provide some flexibility because it's kind of an initial architectural plan. So this way, if they do make some changes to the roof treatment or something like that, then they have that extra space for future. That was just kind of the initial elevation to show how they could fit 3 stories on there. So they've requested the 12 meters just to provide that flexibility.
Yes, if you could.
Thank you. Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is more, amazing news for this community, for Saugeen Shores. If we are able to bring forth 60 new long-term care beds for Saugeen Shores, it's amazing news. And let's hope we can get it have it announced. And if anything I can do, or any member of council, I should speak on behalf of all council, we can do to lobby the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, please let me know, because I'd be glad to tackle something like that. In terms of the neighbor's concern, I hope that there is close attention paid, at the time of site plan control from a landscaping perspective. I mean, there's ways to do to lower the look, feel, the height of that building with tree canopies and the right kinds of landscaping. And so I trust that would happen, in that whole building would be softened with the right form of a landscape plan. As Councillor Minaj alluded to, let's not talk about 3, 4, 5, 6 foot trees or 2 meter trees. Let's talk about 4, 5, 6 meter trees and try to soften the look of that building. So, but this is amazing news, and let's hope we can get it done sooner than later, because long-term beds in this community, there's that need is not going to go away. So it'd be a great addition to this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I have a motion moved by Mr. Legault and seconded by Councillor Myatt, dated today, September the 17th, 2018, that minor variance application A-50-18.48 be approved, subject to the conditions on the decision sheet. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Our next meeting will be at the call of the Secretary-Treasurer, and I have a motion moved by Mr. Legault, seconded by Councillor Myatt, dated today, September 17th, 2018, that we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the Secretary-Treasurer. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you, everyone.